But let's get started. I've got a few things for you today to do. We're doing a lot of activities in groups, as you can see, and we're doing a lot of activities that are involving things, objects, and welcome to this session today. Where I'd like to start is, for some of us, is to remember when playgrounds that we used to go to looked a little bit like this one up here on the screen now. Remember back then. And I remember underneath the swing was usually a big hole where kids' feet had scraped, and that's where the water was, usually when it rains. The swing was, you know, kind of crooked sometimes. Sometimes it worked, sometimes it didn't. Compared to patch playgrounds of today, where they have colour, they have multiple ways in which to access and multiple things to do there. And they're quite different in that respect. How about getting up and down stairs when you can't? Now, I know some of us have probably been in that situation. Some of us have been disabled, as it were, for a short period of time and find it hard to get around. Others permanently might find it difficult to get up and down stairs, for example. And changes to stairs and outside spaces like this, where we have design principles built in to the process of moving from one part of a dwelling to another part of a dwelling. Here's what I'd like you to think about. Most of you have seen this. Amazing, I love it, right? Most of you have seen this in terms of assessment. A lot of us have seen this in terms of, I would like to include inclusion in that because I think it's definitely at play. So I'd like you to think of anything in your own life that has made your life easier. Might have been like the swings, might have been like the ramp, but something that's made your life easier. Have a chat with the folks at your table about something that's made your life easier. Let's call it time on that one for now. What's really exciting to me as a presenter is putting strangers in some groups and having to stop them talking. So that's a pretty great start. Thank you for your kindness in that respect. Let's just have a quick whip around. I'm not going to spend too long on it, but I know a lot of people are going to probably talk about technology and things like that. So let's go with the technology thing for a little while, but then I'd like to see some examples of maybe some other things that have made our lives a little bit more easier. How about this table over here? Just one thing.
It's a medical thing for me. I've got 2 metal knees and it's just made me just amazingly happy.
Nice job. Yeah.
I love my metal knees.
You love your metal knees. Good. Where did we go from there? What have we got over here? Just one thing. Anyone? Yes. Dangerous but true. Paying your bill through your phone. Down the back. One thing that made you...
Kitchen appliances.
Yeah. What's your favourite?
The convection oven.
Oh, isn't it? Much better than those old gas ones. And yeah. What about this table here? Anything to add?
The internet. It's pretty much the same.
The internet.
Education.
Yeah, education. Wow, okay, yeah. Social media is supposed to make our lives easier than education. One thing here.
Mine wasn't technologically.
That's okay, yeah.
But it was more being perceptive of where you're at in either your career or education, and offering help and explaining how they do things before you need to ask.
Whoa, wow, mind readers, yeah. Sign us up. Okay, so it's pretty clear that we have a lot of things that have made our lives a little bit easier, and some of them are to do with electronics, some of them are to do with our body and our physicality, some of them are to do with our mind. So there's lots of different ways in which we think about our inclusion strategies. All of this is about ideas around design. It's about someone thinking, this doesn't work, we should redesign it or refix it. And more specifically, it's not any sort of design, it's a notion of universal design. Design that already at the front end is inclusive. Design that already says you're welcome. It's easy even with a metal knee to come into this space or to play in this playground. So this notion of universal design is where this session is started. throughout this session, what I'm going to do is I'm going to provide some opportunities for us to practice and explore this, but I'm also going to give you, hopefully, an example about how I've tried to use UDL at the same time as talking about it. Okay, so pedagogically. So within some of these slides, there will be some short film clips, some short clips, and they're designed just to prompt us a little bit more around what we're thinking and to input some more information. I also have very many other forms of input. So the first one that I'm going to start with is this one here, a short video from Julie. Thank you, Julie. So hopefully I've got the right colour and we should be able to go. So all these are available on YouTube, all these clips, some great ones about UDL.
When you think about what our buildings used to look like when contractors would build buildings and they'd have these giant staircases out in front of the building, eventually someone's going to come to that building who's using a wheelchair or maybe who is using a walker. And those individuals can't access that building. They cannot get in because of the stairs. So then someone else has to come and retrofit the building, right, and make a ramp in the back or make a separate entrance so that those users of the building can get into the building. Once folks kind of figured that out and buildings were then designed to accommodate multiple users, they were from that point on designed so that many individuals could get into the building no matter how they're trying to get into the building, whether it be that they're being wheeled in, whether it's a mother with a stroller, etc. That's a universal design. That's kind of where it was born. So the application to education is, instead of designing a lesson and having it the students participate in one way and then later having to go and retrofit the lesson, UDL in education is all around designing the lesson with multiple users in mind ahead of time.
Right, so thank you, Julie. A very quick, sharp, straightforward definition. I will draw your attention to the text at the bottom, which is an example of universal design as well. It allows it to be heard or said or viewed by more people. All right, so for this session, my name is Karen Lambert, by the way. I'm at work down at Monash campus at Peninsula in Frankston, and I'm a part of the health and physical education team, and I'm really glad to see so many people who are probably coming from all around Melbourne, I would suspect, at this point in time. So thank you. You're all very welcome, and thank you for coming along. I've set 4 workshop aims or objectives or outcomes today, so I'd love for you to be able to walk away with these sorts of things. They're the standard stock goals and actually one of the features of universal design for learning, setting explicit goals and outcomes and objectives. The first couple are to do with defining key terms and being able to walk away from here and tell someone what UDL is, like Julie just did in 1.23 minutes. The next session, which will be later in the session, is about an application. So I've got some examples of some teaching content that I'd like to share with you, and you'll be able to get a chance to plan a lesson plan using universal design, as Julie said, from the get-go. So hopefully we're at that point. Along the way you'll have a little bit of information, so I love that people are taking notes, and you're free to use your computers at any time as well. If you have any questions, maybe grab a piece of post-it note, write it down, and then we can have a chance to have a debrief and have some questions as we go along the way as well. I think the context is really important in this conversation. The context is about thinking, it's about change, it's about inclusion, and it's about innovation. That is not to say that we're not all doing innovative and inclusive and thoughtful things in our classrooms. I know many of you are, and I know many students here are thinking about those things in their assignments. How this is a little bit different, as I think it relates to UDL, is if we want to make change happen, we have to stop doing the things that haven't worked in the past. So the idea here is about us rethinking and trying something new and something different. So I think education has a lot to learn from outside, for example, from architecture and design, basically from outside its field, in order to substantiate these claims of creating things that are more inclusive to us. And even this from mathematics or from science, it's quite a great starting point with Albert Einstein. Here's what I'd like us to do. This is going to be interesting, Because here's the thing, we had 141 folks enrolled, so I'll just say to the other 100 who are online, hopefully my colleague Ruth Jean's coming in from England as well, who wasn't able to join me this evening. But we've got a few people coming in. So what I'd like to do is we're going to have a little mixer, because it's nice. But you've got about 60 seconds or so, and I'd just like you to go and have a chat and find some new person. I will give you a cue that it's time, and then you'll go and find a new person, then I'll give you a second question, then a third question. Is everyone cool? Know where we're going? All right, so you might want to give yourself an eye on someone already who you might like to go and have a chat, but exclude the people in your group for the time being because you've already met them. So you're going to include somebody else, all right? So give someone an eye across the room, and with your new metal knees, get on out there. Okay, so let's go talk to the first person. Go talk to a person who's somewhere else. I don't mind where you go, but you're discussing the Einstein quote. I'll pop it on the board again. Discussing the Einstein quote. Okay, folks, so next question, go and find another person. And your next question or your prompt is, how have you recently changed how you think? Go find someone new. Next question. Okay. And your final question with a new friend. How have you recently changed how you teach? Now that can be inclusive of you folks who maybe have been on a placement. So that's the next question. How have you recently changed how you teach? Right. Again, great energy. Thank you so much. So we probably should start the session now, right? All right, I love the energy. It's terrific to see people interacting and being willing to actually talk about how they're changing, how they're thinking. What I think I'd like to do is to also share with you the rundown of the session, what the session is going to look like. And I know for little brains, they actually like to know what we're going to do next. So you can trust me that you'll get out of here on time, and that I know what I'm doing. Yeah, right, okay. So we've done most of this stuff, which is awesome. We've done that first little section. You don't even know you've been here, and there you know you've got some stuff done already. The second part of the next part of the session is going to be that defining information sort of phase, that where we're going to get a heap of things, and you're going to get stuff, and you're going to have to think. So you're going to have to be careful that you don't get the overwhelmed state where you shut down and you get confused and all that. So just monitor yourselves and talk to your buddies. There should be good opportunities to have conversations about each one of the activities that we're doing. So the next activity that we're going to do is a little jigsaw activity. But before we go there, I have my trusty assistants who I've recruited from the audience. They're going to come around for you. Some of you I can see have printed up this material, but they're going to come around and give you the booklet, and I'm going to talk to you about the booklet because it would be remiss of me not to give you, you verbal linguistic learners, a little bit of something, right? So it's coming around here. I believe all these things were sent to you as well today. So the best part about that is you get to scratch some notes in your booklet today, and then you can have a clean copy should you decide to go home. So in this booklet, you'll notice that there's lots of words, there's a few pictures, there's a front and a back, but it's not linear. You don't have to go from front to back. And at times, there's also a little light bulb. So there's some light bulb pages throughout there, and how I'd like you to treat the light bulb pages is that might be the spot where you have an insight, where something clicks for you. It could be clicking in terms of an assignment you need to do next week, a new class you have that you have to adapt your teaching with or to or for. So it could be any kind of insight, or it might also be a question. So hopefully we've got enough of them to get around. Thank you, Dr. O'Connor, for helping us. Yeah, well, we'll get some more. As long as there's about 4 or 5 at each table. Okay, so you've all got copies of them? Yeah. You've all got copies of them. Okay, so let's move along. So the booklet there, and we're going to look at thinking about defining some of these terms. before going there, see, this is always the trouble with the booklet, right? Always. Everybody wants to use the booklet and they forget about the person. You don't need all that information right now. It's going to hurt your brain, because I'm going to tell you a story. I'm going to tell you a story about the 1950s in the States when the Air Force was getting flash planes, very flash planes, and training pilots, but having not much success in terms of return for their money. What they were finding was their pilots were not matching the technology that was being invested into them, so their performances were decreasing. So at first, the pilots got blamed. Second, the technology got blamed for that. And thirdly, of course, the trainers got blamed for that. But what they actually worked out eventually was that it wasn't a problem with any of those things. It was a problem with the cockpit of the plane. You see, what had happened with the cockpit of the plane is that the manufacturing company had designed almost a one-size-fit-all, a cockpit for the average pilot. So what they eventually worked out was there's no such thing as an average pilot. So the cockpit wasn't performing as well as it could. And in fact, I think a guy called Gilbert Daniels decided he's going to find out, I'm going to find out. Measured 4,000 pilots, and guess how many he found were average? 10%. 10%. We got any raises on 10% over here? So that would be 400. And he found zero. He found none were average. He found on all things that were measured in terms of what the pilots needed, they varied. The tallest person wasn't the heaviest person. The shortest one might have had the longest arms and the longest reach, but maybe the shortest legs. So they found that on all these things that were needed, all of these variables that were needed to be expert fighter pilots, they were varying. Now, this analogy is about the myth of the average, and you can see here that that picture actually informs you and tells us that. And what it is actually an example of is where we can have a jagged profile about what learners, for example in this case the pilots, needed and what they needed to be able to do. Now this jagged profile for a pilot was obviously being able to work all of these controls, was to be able to survive G-forces and not pass out, was to do any number of different things. So they had these things they needed to do. So what they decided to do was to ask the company who makes the cockpit, stop designing for the average pilot. And of course, you can imagine what they were. They were like, that's too hard, that's going to cost us too much money, we're not going to go and do that, that's ridiculous. But the Air Force at the time was actually really persistent. They said they want no more average pilots, they want the best pilots. So what they ended up working out was, and you're going to love this one, was all about the seats. They decided to make adjustable seats in the aircrafts. And the adjustable seats in the aircrafts worked at the edges of the pilot's capacities, so that any pilot could fit into any jet and fly it anywhere and anyway. Cool story, eh? So this is this myth of this average idea. Interestingly, if we segue that to learning and learners, I think most of us would be, you know, we've heard the term teaching to the middle, teaching to the average student. And precisely what Julia was saying in the video, it's this notion that there is a middle and there's edges. But this graph, for example, is the jagged graph for a learner, a typical learner. On the side are their adjustable seat capacities. You know, it's not driving the controls or G-forces. It's actually memory, language, knowledge, vocab, whatever it is that needs to happen in our learning areas. No student will be average in any of them. And in fact, they'll be great in one and then pretty dodgy or lower in another. And I think we need to accept that and understand that. So my question is, why teach to the middle when we have a jagged profile? So universal design for learning permits us to do that. But before we go there, what I'd like to ask you to think about is, what are the adjustable seats for your learning area? How can you adjust your seats for your learners, and in what kinds of domains? And I'll give you an example. I'm in health and physical education. My adjustable seat, or something that I would need my young people, is probably to have balance One kid's going to be good at balance, another might be poor at balance. Motor coordination, so they'll vary. So they would be my adjustable seats. The good news is, as our friend with the new knees no longer knows or worries about, is that the seats come in all shapes and sizes, don't they? For all purposes and for all times. So what I want us to do now in our small groups, I realise you're going to have mixtures of people from different learning areas, but on the piece of paper with the texters there, I want you to have a discussion about what are the adjustable seats? What are the sorts of things that you're going to ask your students to be able to do in your learning areas? If you decide you want to talk about maths or English or science or whatever, you can, or primary students or secondary students, whatever you like, okay? That's your task there. So what are your adjustable seats? It's these things on the side. What are the characteristics, the skills, the abilities, the capacities, okay? We're using the metaphor of this adjustable seat because it means we're going to have to teach adjusting memory, adjusting cognition, adjusting vocab. Go for it. See what you can come up with. We're going to have a few minutes on that one with the people in the group. So someone can take control. G'day. You want some friends? Aww. What? For folks at home, you can actually choose a learning area as well, perhaps one that you teach into. If you don't have any in common at your tables, maybe do literacy, or maybe do numeracy, or personal and social capability. You can choose a general capability. Okay, so listing your adjustable seats, you might find in different learning areas the same things appear. That would be great, huh? Wouldn't that make teaching easier if we've concentrated on our similarities rather than our differences? All right. If you have three or four things that we need to adjust, go on to the next two questions. Ways that you will support a student who is at one end or the other. So if you're a little stumped, the ones that are on the board here are fairly standard. See if some of them relate. See if you can get down two more. How would you support students who are at one end or the other end of one of your chosen ones? So what are you choosing?
From assessment.
For this one, let's think about the capabilities that we're trying. If it's time management, right? If it's sharing, it's maybe collaboration. Are you with me? If it's
the skill.
Working with others.
Or building a relationship.
Use those ones that I've popped up there as a prompt, but yeah, exactly. Mathematical reasoning. Yeah, so think about the general capabilities. Yeah, pop down a couple and have a think. Okay, so let's move on. Great list. You can keep going there for all day, I think. Right, let's stop the listing and start to now think. Now the thinking starts. And I think it's fair to say, that in my class, memory, I'm going to have young people in my class, we already know, right? Who has a good memory in this class? Who's a good memory in this class? Good memory? Good memory? Good long-term memory? Good in quizzes, good in tests, could remember all the books, got all the good scores, go into the exams, loves exams, hates essays. Yeah? Right? How about others? Not a good memory. And how funny is it that it gets worse as you get older, right? Yeah, but we're not even going to talk about that. Why, right? All right. So I can't come in here and assume you are all average with memory, can I? I have to be able to do things that are going to support you. That's why there's coloured things. That's why there's puppets on the table, so that you can actually be holding something and doing something. Who finds holding something while they're talking about it helps with their memory, right? So there's many, many different ways in which we can think about this. So if you have low or a high, brainstorm the ways in which you can support young people in your class around one of your first ones. Low and high. All right. So what I'm hearing, and what I'm seeing and what I'm feeling is pretty cool. Because you should feel comfortable because you're working in a zone that you're sharing ideas with people, but they're things that you already know, right? So I heard someone say, oh, well, in my class I do this, or with my kindergarten, with my year 11 class, I might try. And, oh, that's a good idea. Okay, so we're working in our comfort zone for now. And what I'm going to do in just a second, but not quite now, is I'm going to push you out of that comfort zone a little bit, because you're all already talking universal design. You're already talking about these things. But there's sometimes things that a lot of people say, oh, it's too hard, takes too much time. Okay? So in your booklet, the first couple of pages that are in your booklet come from an organisation called CAST. And the CAST organisation is where I've taken a lot of these resources, and they have a lot of images, they have a lot of videos, they have a lot of examples. But those first few pages there come from a document that's actually quite long. And I don't think you have to be a genius to work out why I wouldn't give you this about now. Okay? All right? So I've given you the first 2 pages. But this resource is definitely something that's going to extend you. You will see some of your ideas in here, but you will see many more you haven't even thought about. So that's going to be an awesome resource. It's like the textbook to take home today. But firstly, we're going to start with some coloured pictures and some textures and some pens, because we want to feel comfortable without having to then go, well, what is syntax? I don't even know what syntax and symbols are. How am I going to use that in my teaching? All right? So that will be what you go home and download to extend. But before we go there, what we're talking about here is we're talking about a curriculum that provides access to everyone, regardless about where they are on this jagged scale. So we forget the idea of the average, stop teaching to the middle and start teaching to the edges, just like they did in the pilots and the cockpit and the chairs, all right? That's what we're teaching for. So let's just by way of really quickly, what you'll see at most of your desks, you have a brain. You've probably got more than one brain, I hope, but you have a brain, a laminated brain, all right? So some of our scientists will like that little cross-section. But you have a laminated brain on your desks, which means that it's coming, Justin. It's okay, I'll give you your brain in a second. Poor Justin. But it's coming. Each group for the time being is only going to work on one aspect, okay? Because if I gave you all 3, it's going to do your brain in, right? So that's all we're thinking about now. Don't worry about anything else, even as pretty as they look. So this is a Y group. This group's a how group. What? Why? And what? Okay, you folks can choose whichever one of the 3 that you like for the next activity. So let's just go here. You've got a why, a what, a how, and you've got a brain that's got a colour in it. So what you'll notice is that each parts of these brains are coloured in different ways. This is indicating where neuroscience has been informing these universal designs for learning ideas. So if you know even a little bit about neuroscience, we know that different sections of our brain are responsible for different things. So it makes sense that this would be a brain-based kind of concept. The idea of why is about engagement. Here they are up on the board and I've colour-coded them in the same. It's about why are we doing this? Why are we doing this? Well, if we can't answer the why, then we're probably not going to have much hope with any of the what or the how, right? So if our students are asking us why are we doing this, then that's a great cue for us to go back to what is our outcomes, our purpose, and why are we trying to achieve these particular educational goals. So you have some coloured, but here's what the task is. Basically, I've got some information up here on each one of them. So there's 3 principles. We have to get the language right. So there's 3 principles. The first principle is called provide multiple means of representation, and that's the group that's the what's. The second principle is when we're teaching young people to be inclusive, we should be applying multiple means of action. action and expression. How do they show us what they know and can do? This kind of makes sense. It's a no-brainer. Someone's put this together and got a whole website and selling all these products. It's like, this makes perfect sense. And the final one, multiple modes of engagement. We can't just keep blowing stuff up in the front of our science classes, as much as I did love that when I went into Year 9 science when something was burning or smelly. It was a way in which the teacher engaged me in my learning, and I still remember them. So the why, the what and the how. There's a little bit more information on those, and you have them on your tables, okay? So on your tables you have your brain, but you've also got this lovely picture. We're only talking about these principles for now. That's this one. On the reverse, don't go there, scary. Right? So just the green brain and the little thing for now. So all you're going to do for your group is you're only going to read the green stuff. Don't read anything else. You're only going to read the green stuff. You're only going to read the blue stuff. You're only going to read the purple stuff, okay? So that's the task that I'll give you some colour. All right, so what is your task? Firstly, I'm going to ask Julie to contextualise this for us, because she has an amazing analogy. Now, some of you are probably sitting back here going, this sounds like differentiation to me. This sounds like differentiated learning. But she has a nice way of explaining how the two things are quite different. So we're going to listen to her first, and then I'm going to give you an activity. Is that okay?
On Earth is UDL. UDL stands for Universal Design for Learning, and it is not differentiated instruction. Whenever I present to teachers or I talk to teachers and I say, oh, UDL is a really great way to give kids choices for how they're going to learn and how they're going to personalize their learning, I hear, oh, I do that already. We used to call it DI. Well, DI exists and UDL exists, and they are actually two different things. And so to give you a little analogy, UDL is kind of like when you're having a dinner party when you put out a buffet. So when you're teaching and you want to give students choices for how they're going to learn, you would put out a buffet of options. For example, you would say, after you are solving all of these math problems, you're going to explain or justify how you solve them. And you can do that in a poem, or you can do that in a narrative, or you can create a little skit, or you can do a poster, and you're going to justify your answer. And so what you're doing is you're putting out a buffet of all options. And by nature of having those options, students have to become very creative and self-directed and choose what's best for them. Differentiated instruction, on the other hand, is a similar framework in that it's still providing options for students, but those options are often managed by the teacher. For example, I might say to a certain student, you know, I know you have a hard time writing, and so why don't you draw me a picture about how you solve that? Or I might take a whole group of students who I think need a little bit more challenge, and I take them aside and I say, okay, because you're finished, I want you to work on this. And so those options are kind of like making meals for every single kid in your class. And if I had the option to either put out a buffet and allow my students to choose, or to make 30 meals, I would choose putting out a buffet. And so part of teaching and learning today is about giving students control of their own learning and transferring some of that power back to them. Because coming up to a buffet requires that you have to self-assess, and you have to think about what is it that you need to eat and what is it can you eat, and then you put it on a plate together. Whereas as teachers, if we're worried all the time about creating these perfect meals for everyone, we're going to be exhausted and we're going to be burnt out in the kitchen.
Got me some burnout going there. All right, so thank you for Julie's analogy where differentiated learning, you know, is the buffet or the three-course meal for students. Right, so you are now in your groups and you've now got your brains. You folks are doing just purple. You're just going to be looking at the purples for now. Is everyone okay with regards to instructions? The task is this. You're going to unpack together your principle. So all you're doing is just reading the information there, and I want you to identify examples of this that you currently use in your practices. And then I want you to identify those things where you might be able to enhance it. How do you turn it from a meal for 6 or 10 or 20 students into a buffet? Okay? You can use the key questions that I have cheated and put on the other side of here, because I just wanted to put something on the other side. So you folks would be using the, what's your brain? So the purple, okay? Go for it. All right, so you can have a look at them. So have a chat about the principle. What is it? What does it involve? What does it include? And then identify in your current practices where you are doing this principle. Not the guidelines just yet. Stick with the principles for now. Don't look at the guidelines, too much information. All right, for those fast finishers, and I know you want to have more information, you're in a state now where you want more, you can now turn over the page, but only do your colour. And this I'm introducing to you is now what's called the guidelines. So you've just looked at that one principle, now you're looking at the guidelines for that principle. So only stick with the green, only stick with the purple, only stick with the maroon and the blue. This will give you more ways to up the ante on it. So, here's what I'm hoping. You probably now know a little bit more about one of these principles. A little bit more. Remembering that it's just some dot points and they're colourful and they're pretty and it's to attract you so that you're interested. It's not that 60-page book. All right, here's what I'd like you to do now. You know a little bit more about one. Now, if I had a classroom of young people, I'd have everyone number off and then I'd get you to form those expert groups and I'd have a whole lot of why, what's and how's all come together and have a chat. But I'm aware of the time, so forgive me, that would be the most logical and the most messy and fun thing to do. But I'm going to leave you here. So I'm going to give you with your group now to have a conversation about the other two. What do you do with regards to the other two? It's going to be a shorter conversation. You have 5 minutes to look at the other two. Similar sorts of thinking. What's the principle? How does it look? What does it look like in your practices? Then bring the guidelines in and see if you can shine it up. We're looking for adding things to what we currently do. So start to step away from the things that you're safe with and find some things that are a little bit uncomfortable. Okie dokie. So I'm seeing a few little brains, a little light bulbs going off. Don't forget to pop that little moment down. Lots of conversations, lots of questions, which is terrific. So we've had a little bit of input now, we're learning a little bit more about it. Here's what I'd like you to have a discussion about. You can choose one of these to answer, or you can choose all of them to answer, whatever you like. Now, if you just want to go with your why that you feel comfortable with because you've done that, or your what because you're comfy, or you want to have a look at all of them, but basically the next logical thing for us to ask is, what does this look like? How can I provide these strategies that really are hitting this why or this what or this how? Right? What kinds of things? How are you going to engage learners in a variety of new, different ways, now using your guidelines and information? Now, there's a little catch to this. You have some objects on your table. One of them is a puppet. You can make a choice about whether you would like to present back to the rest of the group using your puppet, or whether you have an object on the table there, or whether you'd like to dance it, sing it, rap it, whatever you like. Yeah, you can. It wouldn't be the first time I've stood on a table and danced. Alrighty, so that's your task. Be thinking puppets though. Alright, choose one of those questions to answer. What is your now U-Butte example of you now getting your head around this particular this particular profile, this particular principle and set of guidelines? What's your best example? Get ready to share it with the rest of the group in any way that you like, as long as you are answering that question. Again, I love all the conversations. Hopefully you got each other's details. So, I'm not going to make you all do anything that you don't want to do. Yeah, but unless you go, oh. or unless you'd like to. So, I'm going to start with, who would like to give us an example? If you would, you don't have to. Who would like to give us an example about how you might motivate learners purposefully? So that would be an example of why. So about engagement. So a strategy that you could use. You can use however you like to share it back. Is there anyone who chose the green? Okay, let's move on. I'm going to suggest that even just putting fun things on the table is going to motivate learners, and that you had conversations that were purposeful but scary about the possibility of being exposed for your poor ventriloquist skills. But it doesn't really matter, because we have 2 others to go on to. Right. How about, did anyone, or would you like to share back something around the what? Okay. It's all right, because I've got plenty of time. Yeah, we've got someone here who's going to put his unbroken hand. Yeah, I know, that's right. I know one of you. So here's a perfect example. You've all heard of fight-flight, right? So you all know about the amygdala and the limbic system, how it's responsible for like freaking you out and you can't think anymore and you get cranky and you run or something like that. If I made you do it, that might happen. That is not an example of engagement. That's an example of fear. That's an example of a threat response. But while we have a performer over here, we can go with that one.
Yeah, so on the what I was saying, what the emu was saying, sorry. So when we're supplying information for students, possibly give them options and say that I use a thing called MyEd where it provides like a web quest where it might have videos linked in and different like definitions linked in. We say, okay, you can go to MyEd to find the information, you can go to the book to find the information, or you can sit and take the notes off the board that I'm going to do to get the information.
And then what happened to emu? Yay, great. Okay, so there's a resource. How do you spell that resource?
MyEd?
MyEd?
Yes,
just
M-Y, capital E, capital D.
Good one, thank you very much.
It might be a paid resource, I'm not sure.
Okay, we can check it out anyway. There'll be a free trial. All right, anyone want to give the how a go? Anyone want to think about, because I know I had a group here ask me about assessment, so surely it must be the multiple, ways of showing what students know and can do. Okay, let's go.
I'm not sure how to use a puppet apart from just hold it up there.
We won't look then.
I'm getting recriminating looks at the puppet. Anyway, so if we had a group of year 9s and they needed to be engaged in the vocabulary for rabbit-proof fence, then one of the things we could do is you could have puppets. You could have that they need to just actually go through the list. That's one thing, and go through the list and find out dictionary meaning. Another thing they could do is get an iPad and make up a game where they have to do matching. They could make up a poem or a creative piece that uses synonyms with all of the pieces of the vocabulary. Dance. Yeah, you explain how to use dance. So they dance with it. No,
Make a group dance up together.
make a group dance. Good, with the vocabulary piece. And of course they use puppets and learn ventriloquism at the same time.
Right. Okay, so we're multitasking, multiple outcomes met. Thank you very much for sharing. Thank you. Thank you. It's pretty brave to be able to do that and being screened out all over the world here at Monash, because that's what we do out there, screaming to millions of people in their own homes. Yes, we have a question from the floor or a comment.
Just an example.
Go for it, yeah.
In teaching astronomy as a subject matter content area with Year 9, I gave them the task of studying one aspect of astronomy. It could be rockets, it could be life on Mars, it could be Pluto, it could be galaxies, and they chose out of a myriad of different areas that interested them. So motivation came in by their having choice of the area that interested them. They had to study that for 3 weeks in a library back in those days, but nowadays you do it online, of course. And then they had to write a report on it and present to the rest of the class their knowledge about that area. Boy, did that motivate them to know, and they came to know more about that than even I did, the teacher. That gave them a sense of self-respect, and it's a terrifying thing to stand up in front of a class and talk.
Yeah.
So that raised all sorts of other interesting aspects.
Yeah.
So that sort of, in a sense, covers all three.
Yeah, in some kind of way it does, but these days we've got so many more options, we can actually have that exactly the same. And perhaps if we did have young people who didn't feel quite comfortable in doing that, they could perhaps prepare a video and just show the video, or interview a friend and have the same kind of things. They could pretend to be like Michael Parkinson would have been back there, wouldn't it? What do you think about Pluto? So there's multiple different, I think technology has certainly enhanced what we're capable of doing in terms of universal design for learning. And I think what we're getting at is like hitting these things at multiple times, but it's not just about in our scaffolding our assessments in that kind of way, it's about scaffolding our teaching using these things all the time so that young people get a chance to try the ventriloquist puppets, the report, the interview, the video, the role-playing, in order to be able to piece together their own sets of information in ways that suit them and their learning styles. Most of us are aware of those things. We're aware how we like to learn, and the tendency at schools is to just go, well, the report is the be-all and the end-all because the assessment is the be-all and the end-all. And there may be some questions online about that, but thank you for the puppets. All right, so the next part of this session, I did change the batteries here. The next part of this session is an application. So I've got you thinking about what these things mean and what your understandings are, what you're safe with and what you're comfortable with. But some of you I know are thinking, well, okay, this is all very good and well, but when I get some content, what does that look like and how might I be able to then start a lesson planning process? So I prepared a little something earlier, which is a small handout, an A4 size sheet that's got a piece of content from a content description in the Victorian curriculum. It comes from either health and physical education, science, English and history, I think. So we should have enough people at each of the tables to be able to... The good thing is I chose Year 6, so even I'd be able to do the science stuff, right? So what I've got there is a content description and a content elaboration. And I'm going to give you a lesson planning template, and I want you to take that content and turn it into a lesson that you could give to a Year 6 class that is UDL infused. Yep, so that's the money, right? That's what you came here for, I hope. That sort of process. So my assistants are going to help me hand these out. Thank you, assistants. Look at them, huh? 4th year Monash University students who have an assignment on universal design for learning for VCE, health and human development. Go figure. There's some more over there. Yeah. Thanks. All right. Yeah, one on each table. All right. So there you go, you folks. So on the top is your content area. On the top is your content area. Before you get too excited, I'm going to give you some more tips that are going to help you. In your booklet, you will find a double pager that looks like that. Go find that right now before you start doing. Yep, you'll find a double pager that's a talk called Instructional Design Planning or something like that. All right. May I borrow it? May I borrow it? All right. So, for most of us, for some of us, it's probably been a very long time since we've seen a lesson plan, right? Remember these old things? But for many of us, they're standard practice that we get better at our teaching because we're thinking about our pedagogical practices. So, the information that's in this booklet on these 2 pages should be not new to you. The first, establish clear goals and outcomes. We have to write outcomes for our teaching. The second section, anticipate learner needs. Who are your students? What's a typical What's a typical... It's all right. It's only because of the recording. What's a typical Year 6 student look like? What might their needs actually be? Think about the jagged profile. All right, so they're all things that we're familiar with. The third one, measurable outcomes. That's about assessment. How are we going to assess as we're going along? I think the only step that's different or new that adds a UDL is this instructional experience. So it's the teaching and learning activities. All the rest is fairly standard lesson planning for us all. Best part is I've given you some information already to start with, so you can backward map to the objectives or the aim or the process there, and you can forward map using these sheets into the activities and the activities that you might use to cover this particular piece of content. I'm going to let you talk to each other and figure it out. Find the stuff in the handout. If you need some support, just give me a yell. The section you're focusing on should be just section 4 in this handout. And you have all your other notes now that you can use. All right, so you have all the coloured sheets, you have all the bits and pieces, but you've got a piece of content and you're doing some planning. So I'm going to just call time there, and as much as I'd love to stay and on for another half hour or so and see what we could come up with, and look at the rest of the slides I've got and eat all the food, and have great conversations. This part of the session was just for you to get a chance to try and see if you could use this lens to make things happen with a piece of content. Remembering that you have one very tiny content descriptor or key elaboration from one curriculum area. And for us primary teachers, you have to be across multiple curriculum areas at multiple levels. So this is just for Year 5 and 6. So, and I deliberately chose pieces of content that spoke to or permitted an opening up for some of our thinking that we'd already been talking about. As you can see, within the content elaborations and descriptions, there's opportunities already for thinking with UDL in mind. That won't always happen in your content. Sometimes it would just say, you must learn to add up. Though I think that probably we could do something with that that's a little bit more sophisticated. But sometimes it's going to be quite obvious what needs to get covered and perhaps how it's going to be covered. So what I'd like to do now, and I know most of these aren't finished and they're kind of drafty. Some of you wrote it on your own, somebody wrote it with a texter, someone just like took their own notes. It doesn't matter. The point was we had some objectives, which was to learn some more stuff about this and to get a chance to apply it. So hopefully that's kind of there right now. So what I would like to remind you of, how does this get even deeper? How does this go even further? This is that document that I told you about, that's the one that's about 40, 50 pages long. Now, in addition to the guidelines, they then have under each one of the guidelines a series of checklists or checkpoints. So you've got a checkpoint and it gives you examples as well. That's what you need now, right? I'd like to see what someone who actually gets this and gets it well, I'd like to see what they do and what this looks like. But why start with them when we can start with you? You thinking about it, you feeling about it, you being engaged, and then initiating it and moving forward to use this as a form of a new how for you, a new what and new how for you. So that one's just there, that's the guidelines. You're looking for a document that's from February 2011 and it's a Word document. This organisation is also a great resource for you, and I put it in just as the last minute of the slides, but I can pop it up again if you don't get a photo of it on the way out. So some of the folks at home have asked us to share some of these. Folks at home, when they're a little bit incomplete, but if you'd like to have yours shared, if you're not taking with, just leave it on the table. We'll take a photo for them and we'll send it to them so they can see what you've been working on. What I'd also like to, yeah, if they can read it. What I'd like to do is just to bring us together and wrap up the session. And I'd like to do that in two ways. Firstly, I'd like to open the floor and online to some questions that we might be able to answer for about 2 or 3 minutes. And then I want to whip around the room and see if anyone's had any bright lights that have gone on and what those were. So from the floor, let's start with, is there anyone who has any questions to this point? We could probably take 2 or 3. Well, maybe we'll use the microphone as well. Yeah, thanks, Chantal.
I have a question about what's the difference between universal curriculum and universal design for learning?
Universal curriculum, I have no idea.
Yeah, because we do have a assignment. It's about how we understand.
Damn. You do? I don't know, I'm sorry. I don't know what the context for that is, but if you've got a resource, you might be able to check out these folks and take a look at that to see if it's the same thing, but in different language. My understanding is universal design and universal design for learning is a distinct thing that's different to universal. Does anyone know what universal curriculum is? There you go. Right.
Worth mentioning that some of the Australian curriculum is written in universal design.
Yeah. So, question? Because then Justin had a comment. The reason why I'm interested in universal design for learning was because in the very early stages when the Australian curriculum in health and physical education came out, there was a one-liner in the shape paper that said that this curriculum is being informed by universal design for learning. I clicked through and I found this and I went, great. So we're starting from a place, from the shape paper, from the Melbourne Declaration that is already talking about inclusiveness and equity and fairness. So the designers of the curriculum were thinking with this in mind. Okay, so I don't know whether it did translate over into any of the others and if they put it in there, but definitely in health and phys ed, I was the one thing that I found that I thought that's different and that's new, and it affected the language. I had a question, yep, one more question here and then we have a question online.
How to actually design a personalized learning with regard to the limited time and also the high loads of administrative work of the teachers and also the low welfare of the teachers. Thank you.
Okay, well, okay, I'm going to go with the first one, that this is a buffet or banquet approach. It's actually not about doing individualised lesson planning like you're doing now for each kid in your class. Julie Novak's clip, I think, explains that quite nicely. And then the other question was about teachers' capacities. Yeah, well, this is what you're here for. You're here for a professional development opportunity. You can take from that banquet table whatever you like as well. So it's definitely a choice for teachers, as much as a choice for teachers as it is for students, because you've got to feel comfortable doing these things. I think there's a few tools that you can play around with. Are you teaching yet, or are you a current teacher? Okay, so there's a few things that are probably safe that you can play with. Step out the box. Try something new tomorrow. Something different next week that might exemplify this, and notice what the response is. Yeah, I think experimentation, the only way you get better at teaching is if you try things and they don't work. And I think I heard you folks talking about failing and learning and how that's associated. Teaching to the middle and the average is not permitting failure. It doesn't open up failure. It doesn't open up much success either, average success. We did have a question in line, I think was an interesting one, which was about VCE, is that right?
Yeah, we've got one from Sassini, Karen. Can UDL be used in VCE? I understand that there's a set work for teachers to teach in VCE. However, the study design is provided for all to see.
Yeah, look, I think this is a great question, and I don't see any reason why not, especially in Units 1 and 2, why we might not build young people's understanding and knowledge by being more inclusive of the learner needs. I think we're being foolish if we think that all the VCE kids that come into our classes are average. they're going to be very variable across the range, as much so as your Year 4 class or your Year 6 class. And I think the challenge to VCE with the reviews, I know in health and human development, for example, trying to promote critical inquiry, different ways of thinking about the world, less rote learning. If these were the briefs for most of the redesign of the new study designs, then UDL has a place that could come into that, actually. And I think the idea that how you teach things is about motivating learners, and if they're in Year 11 and 12 and all they're there for is a grade, well, keeping them motivated becomes a challenge, right? But also thinking about how you might get them to express that and show that in different kinds of ways. Obviously, the assessment is the trap, right? Like, what does a SAC look like? You know, how do you structure that? I don't think it's a stretch to use this scaffolded in your classrooms at all, to deepen the learning, not necessarily of all students, but to have the opportunity for it to be a different set of learning tools and strategies for all students. Okay, anyone would like to wrap up with an insight or with a moment where you're thinking, like, here's what I'm going to go and do tomorrow or try out? Is there anyone in the room who'd like to wrap up with something like that? Here's something I learned today that I might go and do tomorrow, because what's the point in coming if you're not? Yes. Oh, what? Yeah.
I'm not sure I'm right on track, but I'll give you one. In fact, I've got it with me. The work that I've just given out is an assignment, and it's got 5 or 6 pages in it, and goes 1, 2, 3. You do word list, you do this, and I'm teaching Year 9 English with students with a literacy level of about grade 4. And I'm now going to scrap my design and put them all out as individuals, and get them to then go up and choose which part they want to engage in first. So there's my smorgasbord, and say maybe you do 8 out of 10. Why should you do everything that I've said?
Yeah, wow.
So that's
cool.
where I'm going tomorrow.
Easy.
So and it really answers that question about teacher time. Sure. So there must be something I've got inside me that I know a little bit, and I just need to rearrange it.
Mm-hmm.
Into a smorgasbord, which I haven't done before. I've just said you're going to go start there and you're going to finish there.
Yeah, wow. Gosh, it's tiring teaching like that too.
It really is.
It is. Yeah, anyone else that's had a moment where they just go, oh, okay, here's something that I might do differently or try next week? Yes? Oh, Chantal.
Yeah, I've had a moment of reconnection with something that I've learnt before, and I've been educated as a Montessori teacher, and the concept of a smorgasbord and a buffet really resonates, because one of the main things you have to do as a Montessori teacher is prepare the environment, and you prepare activities for all different levels, and you have it set out there, and you set it out as if the students are coming as your guests into your environment, and this is their space where they're going to be comfortable, and you provide things that are, you don't have an activity there that looks dirty or messy, or, everything has to look nice. And for older students, what you do, instead of, like, similar to what Erica said, instead of just, giving them stapled sheets, what you would do is laminate the sheets that you've prepared, set them up there in, colour-coded levels or whatever, and it could be a challenge for them, or similar to what Erica said, give them a choice of, okay, do 8 out of 6, or a challenge, to progress. You've got to go through this colour-coded set, and then we'll go through another. So they still have that freedom of choice there.
Yeah, wow. Thank you for sharing. So that probably is time for us to conclude the session with the folks online, and due to the timing. I want to thank you all very much for coming into the session, and just want to check back in that everyone feels okay, that this is kind of what we did. You got what you paid for in terms of your food and your drink and meeting new friends and hanging out with puppets. If you feel like there's some more that you'd like to know, then please feel welcome to contact me via the university, and then I'll get back to you with anything that you need to know a little bit more about. We do also have a process where we're doing some surveying of these seminars, and Chantel, was there anything more than that I needed to?
No, but you can contact Edu Events if you need any further questions answered. So we'll get those questions through to Karen as well.
Great.
And also, Erica?
Oh, that's fine.
Oh, a phone that went missing. Alrighty, so thank you so much for coming along. Feel free to leave all the toys and all the plastics and all everything here. Thank you very much for playing out. You're welcome. You're welcome. Don't forget to take your notes with you and leave me my laminations so that I can do it all again for the next group.